How's it going, guys? It's Cole with See-Through Panel, showing off two books that I recently received and read. You may have seen them in my recent haul video. They are The Sword of Hyperborea and Hellboy, The Bones of Giants, published both, of course, by Dark Horse Books, and both retailing for $25 US. Weird that they have a different art on the back and layout, but I'll be talking about both of these in a bit more of a review kind of style than normal, less of an overview of the book, but both of them are pretty well constructed hardcovers. I'm really happy that Dark Horse is putting out recent BPRD books as hardcovers. Nothing too crazy about the build quality here, but it is a nicely put together hardcover. The script for Sword of Hyperborea was by Mike Mignola and Rob Williams, art by Lawrence Campbell, colors by Quentin Winter, and letters by Clem Robbins. The interesting thing I think about the credits is that this must have been coming out during the time when Dave Stewart was finishing his work with the Hellboy universe, because he does the chapter break art and cover art. He colors them, but he doesn't actually color the interiors. But I think Quentin Winter did a really good job making Lawrence Campbell look similar to how he's looked before in his Hellboy work. I should say, before I get too deep here, I will be talking about these spoiler free, but I will be showing off pages, so if you're worried about getting visually spoiled on this, maybe read them first and come back after. We could talk about it. So, Sword of Hyperborea follows the aforementioned sword. You may be familiar with it if you're a long-time Hellboy/BPRD reader. It is carried by Agent Howards during the BPRD storyline, and he is a character that is just awesome and is portrayed really, really nicely in this series by James Herron at times. That's the most memorable portrayal that I have of him. And he is a mainstay in the first issue of this, but does not appear in any issue after, because the story is following the actual sword itself, not Agent Howard's. So this story begins at the very end of BPRD, at The Devil You Know. So definitely read this after you finish the main BPRD storyline, because it's going to spoil a little bit of that. Not too deeply. You can definitely jump in if you want to, but if you care about keeping up to date and keeping track of all of the different facets of this really, really multi-layered story, read this last. Read this. This, I think, is the most recent thing in the BPRD storyline, and it kind of goes further than anything we've seen in terms of timeline. So, as I said, the story really just follows the sword through many, many years and multiple carriers of the sword. This is about the end of the first issue. The second issue, we see a, there we go, London 1916 period piece. What I really liked about the story, actually, real quick, is that it moves through time in a really satisfying way, and does smaller breaks, but not long enough for you to lose the thread, but has nice breaks so you know exactly where you are. There's something that grounds it in that period all the time. This is taking place in Germany in 1916, this issue here. And then we're taking place just after, and I believe 1940, and then jumping to about the 1950s in the final issue, the fourth issue. So I won't get too deep on the story. I really, really liked it. It was definitely worth it. It's a story that I've been really wanting to read after I read the first issue in single issues. I just felt I should wait for the hardcover, and I was really happy to see they put it out in a hardcover and not in just a trade. I'm sure it will be available in the trade eventually, but for now, it is just this nice hardcover. So, Lawrence Campbell. Before I move on, I talk a little bit about the story, but the main draw for me, well, the main draw would be the story, actually. I was really interested to see how this sword was originally getting into the hands of Agent Howard's, and how it moved through time, and kind of the backstory with all of it. But the really, really good thing is Lawrence Campbell here. He is kind of towing the line for me on staying true to the Hellboy aesthetic, but kind of making it just different enough that it's completely unique, while also working entirely in that Hellboy space. He works with shadows similarly to Mignola, but also has a much more realistic style, much more textured style. Mignola tends to be a bit flat. I mean that in the best way, but flat colors, not a lot of differences in the texture. Here's a good example is just how Campbell draws underwater blood. It's kind of hard to see in this light. It looks really, really nice, very realistic, but really well translated onto the page. Quentin Winter did a really good job coloring that. It's kind of hard to, I'm sure it's very difficult to make that look good. But I was really impressed by this book. I love seeing Lawrence Campbell in the Hellboy universe, and I love when we get deep dives into smaller things in the universe, which they do all the time. I find the Hellboy universe to be really rewarding, and things like this book that kind of show off multiple things that have appeared before and things that I'm sure will come after, and really reward you for being a long-time follower of this storyline. Have one more page I'd like to show off before we get too deep. This is something actually we haven't seen anything really like this in Hellboy. Hellboy has a very Lovecraftian kind of nature to it, with the Adru Jihad and all those celestial beings, but this is just kind of extremely, extremely Lovecraftian. Just a being made of eyes, kind of flowing towards the person here. I was really, really happy to see Campbell kind of experiment with designs in this, because things like you saw on the chapter art and in this panel are kind of already set up by other books to look that way. He's kind of keeping on model, which is very good and makes it feel consistent, but this kind of design has already been set. It's nice to see him do something all his own, in his own style, and it would be hard for other Hellboy artists to really capture this feel with their own styles that's more Mignola focused. And I think you'll understand what I mean when I say Mignola aesthetic. This book is a lot closer, I think, to the original Mignola kind of look. Let's see, let's give a credits shout out here. Story by Mike Mignola and Christopher Golden, art by Matt Smith, colors by Chris O'Halloran, letters by Clem Robbins. This one is where I felt the absence of Dave Stewart a little bit, but Chris O'Halloran is doing a fine job. I think he made it work in this book, and a lot of cold colors really helped. The setting of the story really helped him kind of nail down the color palette here. Matt Smith, as you can see, is a bit flatter. The colors are a lot flatter. The art has a little less texture, much less lines, much less shading. A little closer to the original Mignola aesthetic, but a little bit more realistic. Mignola himself tends to have a very almost abstract looking style. Very symbolic, not a lot of like very detailed rendering. You can tell by the shading on Hellboy here that it is very much in that style still. This book is just Hellboy colliding with Norse mythology. It opens with a very slight spoiler here. It's like the first few pages. It opens with him finding the body of Thor. I believe that he's called Thrym in this story. But it opens with him finding the body of Thor, picking up Mjolnir, and then Mjolnir becoming fused to his hand, so he cannot drop it. And so he has Mjolnir in his hands for this whole story. And it kind of revolves around that, him trying to get rid of it, trying to solve another mystery in this area. Let's see exactly where it takes place. Sweden. So it takes place in Sweden. And I think that the whites and the blues are really, really nice to look at from O'Halloran here, and kind of grounds the story in keeping it in that similar color palette with the rest of Hellboy, because you need kind of flat colors, but the colliding of Hellboy's red against the blue is, I think, really nice looking, and it feels a bit reminiscent of other stories I've read from the BPRD. But this one I thought was more kind of just like zany fun than sort of Hyperborea, which is very referential and very in the Hellboy universe. This feels kind of like just a one-shot. It's actually a 4-issue miniseries, but it feels like, actually might be 5 issues. I can't recall. But it feels very self-contained. It does have one character that returns from a previous Hellboy story, but it feels very much self-contained and just a lot of fun. You don't need to know a lot. You could definitely dive into this if you're a fan of Hellboy or Norse mythology. You can just kind of open it up and read it, be very satisfied with the story. If you know anything about Norse mythology, you're definitely going to be rewarded with some of the characters that appear. The thing that I think sets this and Sword of Hyperborea apart, besides the narrative, is the art style, which I think putting them side by side really shows, even just the covers, really shows the difference in art that this universe can have and still feel nice and combined here. They really feel like they're part of the same universe, but they're very different styles. Lawrence Campbell being very realistic, Matt Smith being a bit more impressionistic, like Mignola tends to be. I'll show a few more pages off, because I really like his use of sound effects. I don't think that these are Clem Robbins on letters. I think this is in the art. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know how I would tell. I just kind of got the feeling, but either way, if it's Smith or Robbins, they look great to me, and I really like that use of sound effects, because Mignola himself tended to have a lot of those on the page as well. The way he draws the Valkyrie as well is very classic feeling for this storyline. Matt Smith tends to use these kind of setting panels that come off to the sides, like this cutoff one here. And I think that's also really good, because that happens a lot in the Hellboy BPRD type storyline, where he likes to have these kind of half panels on the sides of the page that kind of set the tone, put you in the space, really put the setting first. Kind of, let's see if I can find a couple more. There's some good ones towards the end. Also, just the way he draws fire is very, very reminiscent of the classic Hellboy style. Really nice sunset by Chris O'Halloran there. Not often you see pinks and purples in Hellboy. But, yeah, I was really, really happy with this book, too. I enjoyed them for very different reasons. If you really want an extension of the Hellboy lore and story, Sword of Hyperborea is for you. If you want just a fun, classic-feeling Hellboy adventure, kind of like early Hellboy, less BPRD, Bones of Giants is definitely the one to pick. I would recommend them both. I'm really happy to have them both on my shelf. If you guys have read this, let me know how you think they compare to previous stories, because I feel that these are reminiscent of different eras in the Hellboy mythos. This is more Hell on Earth kind of feeling. This is more original Hellboy Mignola feeling, but they both definitely work and play in the same space, which I'm really happy that they do, because I'm really was kind of confused about how things would move on after Devil You Know and how things would continue, but seems to be in a pretty good space. There's some nice things set up here for both storylines to continue on. So if you guys have read these, let me know. If not, I would definitely recommend them. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Peace.